Please welcome Rajesh Mirchandani, Chief Communications Officer for the United Nations Foundation, in conversation with NYLE DIMARCO, model, actor, and deaf activist.
Hi there.
Hi everybody, thanks very much for staying with us. This is the last session of Social Good Summit 2018. That is a sad thing. I can hear you all clapping and booing at the same time, but thank you for staying with us. Thank you for staying with us on the live stream as well. But thank you all for making this a huge success. But I want to ask you, are you aware that this is a special day for another reason as well? Does anybody know what that is? It's not a birthday. It probably is someone's birthday, chances are. But today, and I think it'll be apparent why we're talking to NYLE, today is the first International Day of Sign Language. That means thank you, I learned.
Right?
Did you even know there was one?
That's actually applause. That's actually applause.
Oh, that's
so hearing people tend to clap, but deaf people, we wave our hands like this.
So now you learned a word. We're going to learn more words later on. Did you even know there was an International Day of Sign Language? This is the first one. So you did. Okay, good. I'm glad. I'm glad. Did you know that around the world, 72 million people are deaf? That's around 1% of the world's population. And around 80% of those people live in developing countries. They're often a community that is forgotten and voiceless. But no more. Thanks to NYLE DIMARCO. Model, actor, dancer, celebrity, and possibly the most famous deaf person that you know or have heard of in the world. Welcome.
I mean, aside from Marley Matlin, perhaps.
Now, you grew up in a deaf household. Tell us a little bit about what challenges your family faced.
Sure, I think a lot of people actually don't realize that my entire family is deaf. My parents are deaf, my brothers, my grandparents, even my great-grandparents. So growing up, it wasn't really a problem for me. You know, my world was a perfect world, much like a utopia. I would say the one challenge that my family did face was within the education system. When I first enrolled in school, I was quite fluent in sign language by that time, and my teachers were hearing and unfortunately weren't. So oftentimes they would ask me for clarification, or they would ask me to repeat myself, or to speak slower, or to sign a different way to make things easier for them, even though I was more skilled in American Sign Language than they were. So all of the other students in that school who had grown up deprived of language because their parents were hearing and wouldn't sign, were able to communicate with the teachers, but I, was a little bit more advanced than them. At the same time, I was also forced into speech therapy, and so I would have to be pulled out of things like math class to pronounce the letter B for 30 minutes at a time. My mother was furious with this, and she didn't see a point in continuing to do the same things. So she approached the school board, and she, asked them to empower deaf educators to become decision makers and to fight for the next generation of deaf children, including my generation, and to teach deaf people that they can do more and really be change makers. So the school board refused, and my mother was insistent, and we ended up moving to another school. She moved us down to Austin, Texas, to one of the best deaf schools in the country. And so I think the biggest challenge that my family faced was really the empowerment within the education system.
So you grew up in a household of activists, and because your entire family was deaf, you didn't feel any different in your home. So how important was that in you being able to, now stand up and say, hey, don't think of me as differently? How did it help you?
Well, my entire family, as I mentioned, was very much like a utopia. I can best compare it to other hearing people. Hearing people who are born to hearing parents often don't see barriers that aren't there. The world feels normal. You live the way that you live, and you live through a regular childhood, playing with friends, meeting new people. You don't have, barriers that, again, simply aren't there. And that was exactly what my life was like. Growing up in a deaf family, everyone was like me, and it wasn't really an issue at all. I could search for, myself and my identity. I could play sports. I could grow my hair out long and shaggy. I met deaf friends and, had important relationships. And I think, that was really the biggest thing for me growing up, was that I had access to language, which brought me into access to education. And without language, I would have never been able to get into any sort of schooling. And that really was the key for me, and the biggest gift that my family gave me. And many people don't realize that only percent of deaf children are in fact like me, coming from deaf parents. So we're a small subset of the deaf community, and I truly feel that I'm one of the most fortunate out there.
And do you think that affected your confidence? Do you think it made you more confident to say to the world, listen, don't judge me because I'm deaf?
Absolutely, definitely. Growing up, I was very confident in my identity. I was very strong in my deaf identity, even from a young age. I never let deafness define me, but instead I was able to define my deafness, which, I think is really kind of, it's saying to the world, come at me, I'm ready.
And I love that because, that sentence, I didn't let my deafness define me, I defined my deafness. You could insert a different thing in the place of deafness. I didn't let my ex define me, I defined my ex.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, I always tell people, it's really important to love and to cherish your identity. Even if you're still trying to figure that out, it's something that is so important. You have to love yourself first before you do anything in life. Because really, that's what leads to bigger and better things. And it leads to happiness, I think.
Absolutely. That's a great note for the last session of the Social Good Summit, I think. Tell us, why do you think it's important that we mark and acknowledge the International Day of Sign Language?
That's a great question. The funny thing is, this year I had a pretty large press interview, and it was about 30 minutes long. We had a nice chance to chat and go over some questions and answers. And during the interview, the interviewer asked me about sign language and mentioned that it was gesture. And I said, why do you think that it's gesture? Giving him a second chance to see if he wanted to maybe fix himself and misspoke. And he believed that there was no foundation or grammar or syntax to sign language. He believed that it was a form of gesture that was codified on English. And he asked me to teach him the sign for encourage, and I showed him, which is an encouraging motion. And it was like he proved his point. I was furious. I was completely blown away by this. Mind you, he lives in the United States. And so if that's something that's happening in the United States by someone who is, an interviewer on TV and, is aware of these things, imagine what's happening in the rest of the world and in other developing countries where, deaf people don't have the same recognition and the same acknowledgement, and, their languages are not, officialized yet. There's a really heavy stigma, that I came to realize in the US, that people think that deaf people are just gesturing, and it's absolutely horrifying. I mean, I don't think I look like I'm gesturing right now. I would definitely say that sign language is a full and complete language that I'm very proud of. It has its own grammar and its own foundation and syntax, and a lot of us maybe don't realize that, there are in fact, 466 million people in the world who are deaf or have hearing loss, and only 70% of them use sign language, with an even smaller subset of 2% of that group not having access to education in sign language. And a lot of that has to do with the stigma. For the first 7 years of my life in the education system, what I saw with other students and what I saw in my own experience coming from a deaf family, I would never want anybody to ever suffer through that again. And I was really set up, to be more fortunate in the system. And I feel like there's so many other children out there who just get lost in that language deprivation. Recognizing sign languages as full and complete languages is so important worldwide.
And because it's a human rights issue for you.
Absolutely, definitely. Having access to education absolutely is a human right. Having access to language is, of course, a human right. And we can't be depriving children of that any longer. This event, this summit, the SDGs that we're trying to reach for 2030 are so important because it's millions and millions of deaf people out there who are deprived of language. And that's an issue that, of course, I want to solve within the deaf community. But globally, that impacts an even larger community of people with disabilities, making sure that they have access to the language and education that they need. We have to make sure that we continue to work towards these goals and not pushing aside these groups that so desperately need our help.
Now, as a celebrity, you have been able to shine a light on the potential for people with difference, let's say, not disability. What difference do you think you've been able to actually make, say, in Hollywood, where you're working now?
Could you ask me the question again?
Yeah. What difference do you think you've been able to make, given that you have been able to shine a light on the potential of people who are deaf or have other abilities?
Certainly. Obviously there are many other successful deaf people out there who have broken the mold, for sure. But using my platform, I've really tried to focus on language and education. It's really something that I'm very passionate about and something that I believe that I really can make an impact in. And I think, over the last few years, I've met more and more hearing people who know a little bit of sign language and have learned, here and there. And that really impresses me. I think that people are becoming more and more aware of the issues that we face, and they are working to become more inclusive of our community, which is great. I truly hope to see that, change on a larger scale for the rest of the world as well.
And by improving the rights of, or the recognition of deaf people and deaf people's rights, how do you think that could actually make a difference for rights of the wider community of disabled people around the world?
So I am hoping to, of course, use my platform to spotlight deaf issues and, of course, expand that and help, other communities, such as the community of people with disabilities. Many of you may not realize that we actually have 1.4 billion people living in the world with some form of a disability. 98% of them don't have access to formal education. 98% of them. And not having any access, we're talking 1.4 billion of us. We're the largest minority group in the world. And so I really hope to expand my reach and my platform to really address issues facing the wider disability community as well. I know that, the 1.4 billion people out there certainly are going to be the ones helping us and harnessing this momentum to achieve the SDGs in 2030.
So here we are on the eve of the UN General Assembly Week. What's your message to world leaders?
I would say my message for world leaders is to think about us, to think about deaf people and the general disability community as well. And all peoples with disabilities. Like I said, we are the largest minority group in the world, and we're going to be the key to solving the issues surrounding education and access to language that all of us are facing. It's an epidemic now. Language deprivation and access to formal education is something that we should all have access to as a human right. It's just intrinsic of human rights, and in order to achieve the SDGs, I truly believe that they're not only going to have to be inclusive of us, but also work with us. And I would say to think more about inclusion and how inclusion matters.
Okay, well, talking about inclusion, what I'd love to do in the last minute that we have is actually teach our audience a little bit of sign language. Would you guys be up for that? So, how do you say social good summit?
Social.
Everyone do it?
Social. Yep. Good.
Good.
Summit.
Summit. Okay, so let's all do that together. Actually, let's do one more thing first of all. Let's practice that again. Social. Social.
Social. Good. Summit.
Okay. Hashtag 2030 now.
Hashtag 2030 now.
Okay.
One more time. Hashtag 2030 now.
Okay.
Beautiful. I give you all A pluses.
Let's put that, I want to put that all together. Okay, can we put it all together? You guys ready?
Okay.
Okay, let's do it after you. Social Good Summit, hashtag 2030 now.
Social Good Summit, hashtag 2030 now.
Okay. So a couple of you there were applauding using sign language. So everyone, let's do that first of all to say thank you to NYLE and to Gray's interpreter, and then let's give them a round of applause as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you to our final guests. I think that was a fantastic panel to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of the Social Good Summit 2018. I'd like to thank you all. Yes, thank you. Thank you all for staying with us. Thank you all for watching on the live stream and for taking part in the conversations on social media. We've basically broken the internet today, which is fantastic. But before we go, I would just like you, please, to give some thanks to the people who've made this happen. I don't just mean our partners, Pfizer, Facebook, UBS, and the organizers, 92Y, Mashable, UNDP, and the UN Foundation, but let's say thank you to the janitors, to the security staff, to the ushers, to the caterers, to the crew here, everyone. Remember, we've heard so many amazing panels today. Here we are at the beginning of the UN General Assembly Week, and what I think is really amazing about this community is that many of you come together with individual issues, but hopefully you come to this forum and you understand that your issues are all connected. We're all connected by a commonality, our passion for change. You're all change makers already. And if you come here because you're interested in climate, then that means you're interested in health issues. If you're here because you're interested in health, you're interested in poverty and education issues. If you're interested in poverty and education, you're interested in equality. Our issues all intersect, and they're all reflected in the Sustainable Development Goals. So I want you to go back to your communities, go back to wherever you're from, get online, learn more, talk more, advocate more, and as we head into the UN General Assembly Week tomorrow, send a strong message to our leaders that our ambition requires their action for 2030 now. Good night, and thank you very, very much.